The first shots came without warning. Admiral Zexstar watched from the bridge of his flagship as the human colony of New Geneva died. Plasma beams carved through the atmosphere like burning knives, turning cities into glass craters. The humans below never had a chance to fight back. Their primitive defense platforms crumpled like paper against the might of the hegemony war fleet. "Another world falls to our righteous cause," declared High Commander Vorth, his forearms gesturing dramatically at the burning planet below. The humans learned the price of defying the galactic hegemony. Zexstar said nothing. He had been fighting this war for 3 standard years now, and the easy victories no longer brought him joy. The humans were brave, he would give them that. They fought with desperate courage even when facing impossible odds. But courage meant nothing against superior technology and overwhelming numbers. The galactic hegemony controlled most of the galaxy. 7 major species had joined together under the leadership of the mighty Vorthak Empire. The Crystalline Collective provided advanced shields and energy weapons. The hive minds of Kepler supplied endless swarms of warrior drones. The machine consciousness of Tau Ceti offered precision targeting systems and automated factories. The Psion Brotherhood delivered devastating mental attacks that could break enemy morale from light years away. The Aquatic Federation controlled the gas giant mining operations that fueled the war machine. And the ancient builders shared technology so advanced that most species could barely understand its basic principles. Against this alliance of galactic superpowers stood the humans of the Orion Arm. A single species with less than 3 centuries of spaceflight experience. They had spread across perhaps 200 star systems, building colonies and trade routes with determination that impressed even their enemies. But determination could not stop plasma cannons or deflect antimatter torpedoes. "Sir, we have completed the orbital bombardment," reported Tactical Officer Haxon. "All major population centers have been neutralized. Shall we deploy ground forces to secure any remaining infrastructure?" Zexstar considered the question. Standard doctrine called for complete pacification of human worlds. The Hegemony High Command wanted to make examples that would break human resistance across the entire Orion Arm. But, looking at the smoking ruins below, he wondered if there was anything left worth securing. Negative, he decided. Mark this system as pacified and prepare the fleet to jump to the next target. Intelligence reports indicate a major human military base in the Kepler 442 system. We will move to eliminate it before they can mount any coordinated defense. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency to carry out his orders. Zexstar had commanded the 3rd Assault Fleet for over a decade before the war began. His ships were among the finest in the Hegemony Navy, crewed by veterans who knew their business. The humans had fought bravely at every encounter, but they simply could not match the firepower and tactical experience of his forces. As the fleet prepared to enter hyperspace, Zexstar reviewed the strategic situation on his command display. The war was going exactly as the High Command had predicted. Human resistance crumbled system by system as hegemony forces advanced deeper into the Orion Arm. The humans had managed a few successful raids on outer hegemony worlds, but these were pinpricks against the vast resources of the Alliance. Within 6 months, perhaps less, human civilization would be completely destroyed or enslaved. It was almost anticlimactic after years of buildup. The hegemony propaganda machine had painted humans as a dangerous threat to galactic order, a rapidly expanding species that would consume everything in its path if not stopped. But the reality was far different. Humans were just another young race that had grown too bold too quickly. The galaxy was full of the ruins of such species. "Jump successful, Admiral," reported Navigator Quill. "We have arrived in the Kepler 442 system. Long-range sensors are detecting the human base on the 4th planet as predicted." Zexstar studied the tactical display with professional interest. The human base was substantial, built into a series of underground caverns that would provide some protection against orbital bombardment. Several dozen human warships were arranged in defensive formations around the planet. The humans had clearly been expecting this attack. Analysis, Hex? The tactical officer manipulated the sensor data with practiced efficiency. The human fleet consists of 47 vessels of various classes. Their largest ships appear to be heavy cruisers mounting kinetic weapons and primitive missile systems. Defensive capabilities are limited to basic energy shields and point defense arrays. Estimated combat effectiveness is approximately 12% of our current force strength. It was exactly what Zexstar had expected. Human technology lagged decades behind hegemony standards. Their ships were tough and their crews were determined, but they might as well have been throwing rocks at a mountain. All ships, this is Admiral Zexstar, he announced over the fleet communication system. We will advance in standard formation and engage the enemy fleet at maximum range. Focus fire on their largest vessels first. Remember, we are here to eliminate organized resistance, not to take prisoners. Show them the consequences of defying the hegemony. The Third Assault Fleet moved forward like a spear thrust toward the heart of human space. 137 warships of incredible destructive power, supported by carrier groups that launched clouds of automated fighters. The humans responded immediately, their fleet accelerating to meet the hegemony forces in the space between planets. Zexstar had to admire their courage even as he prepared to destroy them. A sane enemy would have retreated deeper into the system, forcing the hegemony fleet to fight through layers of fixed defenses. But humans seemed incapable of backing down from a fight, no matter how hopeless their situation. Entering weapons range in 30 seconds, reported Hex. All ships report ready to engage. Fire when ready. The space between the fleets lit up with energy beams and missile contrails. Hegemony plasma cannons reached across millions of kilometers to strike human vessels with devastating accuracy. Advanced targeting systems guided antimatter warheads through the chaotic battle space to find their targets. The first exchange lasted less than 10 minutes and resulted in the complete destruction of 16 human ships. But the humans did not break. Instead of retreating, they pressed their attack with desperate fury. Human kinetic weapons hammered against hegemony shields with surprising force. Their primitive missiles, guided by what appeared to be crude artificial intelligence, managed to slip past several point defense systems to score actual hits on hegemony vessels. Damage report ordered Zexstar as his flagship shuddered under a direct impact from human mass drivers. Minor hull damage on decks 7 and 8, replied Engineering Chief Molkt. Shield generators are operating at 94% efficiency. No casualties reported. It was barely a scratch, but Zexstar found himself impressed despite the situation. Human weapons were primitive by hegemony standards, but they were remarkably effective within their limitations. More importantly, human tactics were evolving rapidly during the battle itself. Their formations shifted and adapted as they learned how hegemony weapons performed, finding ways to minimize their losses while maximizing their own offensive potential. The battle continued for another hour before the outcome became inevitable. Human losses mounted steadily as hegemony firepower wore down their defenses. One by one, human ships disappeared in brilliant explosions or simply stopped responding to communication attempts. But they never stopped fighting. Even ships that were clearly crippled continued to fire their weapons until their power systems failed completely. Enemy fleet strength reduced to 12 vessels, reported Hex. Shall we offer terms for their surrender? Zexstar considered the question. Standard hegemony doctrine called for the complete destruction of enemy military forces, but something about the human resistance made him hesitate. These were not the actions of a defeated enemy. Even facing certain death, the surviving human ships maintained perfect formation and continued coordinated attacks. Broadcast surrender terms on all frequencies, he decided. Give them one chance to stand down before we finish this. The communication went out immediately, translated into standard human languages by the fleet's linguistic processors. The response came back within seconds, and it was not what Zexstar had expected. Hegemony forces, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force destroyer Indomitable. We appreciate your generous offer, but we must respectfully decline. Our orders are to defend this system at all costs, and we intend to fulfill that mission. Chen out. The transmission cut off with finality that impressed every being on the bridge. Zexstar found himself staring at the tactical display in something approaching admiration. These humans were about to die for no strategic purpose whatsoever. Their sacrifice would not save a single civilian or delay the hegemony advance by even a day. Yet they chose death over surrender with the calm professionalism of seasoned warriors. "Sir," prompted Hexen. "Complete the engagement," ordered Zexstar quietly. "Honor their choice." The remaining human ships died as they had lived, fighting to the very end. The last vessel, Captain Chen's destroyer, managed to ram a hegemony cruiser before its reactor went critical. Both ships vanished in a fusion fireball that lit up the entire system for several seconds. When the battle was over, Zexstar ordered the fleet to hold position while he reviewed the combat reports. Human resistance had been more effective than intelligence estimates had suggested. The Third Assault Fleet had suffered actual casualties for the first time in this war, with 3 ships destroyed and 7 more requiring major repairs. It was a tiny fraction of his total force strength, but it represented something that should have been impossible. "Admiral," interrupted Communications Officer TYRN, "we are receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command." "Put it through." The holographic image of Fleet Admiral Corthan materialized above the command table. The Supreme Commander of all hegemony naval forces looked as imposing as always, his scaled features set in an expression of grim satisfaction. "Admiral Zexstar, congratulations on another successful engagement. Intelligence reports indicate that you have eliminated the last major human military concentration in this sector. Resistance should collapse rapidly now that they lack organized naval support." "Thank you, sir," replied Zexstar. "However, I must note that human resistance was more effective than our projections indicated. They are adapting their tactics faster than any enemy we have faced before." Admiral Corthan waved a dismissive claw. "Desperation makes any species dangerous, Admiral. But desperation without resources leads only to extinction. Continue your advance according to the operational timeline. High Command expects the Orion arm to be completely pacified within 4 months." The transmission ended before Zexstar could respond. He stood alone with his thoughts for several minutes, studying the debris field where brave humans had died defending their homes. Something about this war troubled him deeply, though he could not quite identify what it was. "Sir," said Hexen quietly, "shall we proceed to the next target system?" "Not yet," decided Zexstar. "I want a complete analysis of human tactics and weapon effectiveness. Something about their behavior patterns doesn't match standard xenopsychology models. Forward your findings to Fleet Intelligence and request updated threat assessments for all remaining human systems." As his crew carried out these orders, Zexstar continued to stare at the tactical display. The humans had been completely outgunned and outnumbered, facing certain death with no hope of victory. Yet they had fought with a coordination and determination that veteran hegemony officers found disturbing. It was as if they knew something that the rest of the galaxy did not. 3 days later, as the Third Assault Fleet prepared to jump to their next target, long-range sensors detected something unusual near the outer edge of the system. A brief energy signature that appeared for less than 2 seconds before vanishing completely. It might have been a sensor ghost or the wake of a comet passing through the solar wind. But Admiral Zexstar had been fighting wars for over 30 years, and he had learned to trust his instincts when something felt wrong. He ordered a full sensor sweep of the entire system, but the energy signature did not repeat itself. Whatever had caused it was either gone or hiding beyond the reach of hegemony detection technology. "Sir, all ships report ready for hyperspace transition," announced Navigator Quill. "Very well. Take us to the New Horizons system. Time to end this war." The Third Assault Fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only debris and radiation to mark where human heroes had made their last stand. But, in the cold darkness between stars, something watched them go. Something that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to act. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had more than courage and determination. They had secrets that would change the course of the war in ways that no one could predict. The hegemony advance had been crushing human resistance system by system, but they had not yet encountered the forces that humanity had been holding in reserve. Deep in the space between galaxies, far from any star system that appeared on hegemony charts, the real human fleet was preparing to return home. ships built with technology that even the ancient builders would struggle to understand. Weapons that could crack planets and defenses that could withstand the combined might of entire star fleets. For 3 years, these forces had waited in exile while their colonies burned and their people died. But patience had its limits, even for humans. The time for hiding was almost over. Soon, the hegemony would learn that they had been fighting the wrong war against the wrong enemy. The human ships that had defended the Orion arm were not humanity's military force. They were the bait. Admiral Zexstar sensed none of this as his fleet traveled through hyperspace toward what he believed would be another routine conquest. He remained focused on tactical analysis and casualty reports, trying to understand how primitive humans had managed to inflict any damage at all on his superior forces. The possibility that he had just participated in an elaborate deception never occurred to him. After all, everyone knew that humans were a young species with limited technology and no significant military experience. The idea that they might have been deliberately losing battles while preparing a counterstrike was simply too far-fetched to consider seriously. The war in the Orion arm continued according to hegemony expectations. Human colonies fell one by one as resistance crumbled before overwhelming firepower. Refugee ships fled deeper into human space carrying tales of horror and defeat. The galactic news networks proclaimed the inevitable triumph of civilization over chaos. None of them noticed the small discrepancies in energy readings from empty systems. None of them detected the brief gravitational anomalies that appeared and vanished near the edge of sensor range. None of them realized that humanity had been preparing for this war long before the first shots were fired. The greatest deception in galactic history was about to be revealed, and Admiral Zexstar was going to have a front-row seat for the show. The message arrived through channels that should not have existed. Dr. Elena Vasquez stared at the quantum communication array in her laboratory, watching impossible data stream across her monitors. The transmission was coming from outside the galaxy, beyond the reach of any known technology. Yet the encryption signature was unmistakably human. "Computer, verify source authentication," she commanded, her voice tight with disbelief. "Authentication confirmed," replied the synthetic voice. "Transmission origin, extragalactic coordinates Alpha 779. Source identification, UEN Deep Space Command. Authorization code, Lazarus Protocol." Elena's hands trembled as she input her personal security codes. The Lazarus Protocol had been theoretical, a contingency plan so classified that fewer than a dozen people in human space even knew it existed. According to official records, no human ships had ever traveled beyond the galaxy. Such a journey would take decades with conventional faster-than-light drives. But the data streaming through her equipment told a different story. "Dr. Vasquez," came a familiar voice as the communication link stabilized. "This is Admiral Marcus Kane, commanding the UEN 1st Expedition Fleet. I apologize for the dramatic nature of this contact, but circumstances require immediate action." Elena nearly fell out of her chair. Admiral Kane had been declared missing in action over 20 years ago during the infamous void jump experiment. Official reports claimed his entire fleet had been destroyed when their experimental hyperspace engines malfunctioned. A memorial service had been held. Children learned about his sacrifice in history classes. "Admiral Kane? That's impossible. You died 20 years ago." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," replied Kane with a hint of dark humor. "My fleet did not die, Doctor. We discovered something incredible beyond the galactic rim, and we've been preparing for this war ever since." The holographic projector in Elena's lab activated, displaying a figure she recognized from history books and memorial statues. Admiral Kane looked older than his official photos, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult years in the darkness between stars. But his bearing was unmistakably that of the man who had once commanded humanity's most advanced exploration fleet. "Admiral, the hegemony forces are systematically destroying every human colony in the Orion arm. Our defensive fleets have been eliminated. Billions of people are dead or enslaved. If you have some kind of secret weapon, now would be an excellent time to use it." Kane nodded grimly. "I understand your urgency, Doctor. But you need to understand what really happened 20 years ago. The void jump experiment was not an accident. Earth's government discovered evidence of the hegemony long before they announced their intentions to destroy human civilization. Intelligence operatives had infiltrated several hegemony worlds and learned about their expansion plans. Elena stared at the hologram in shock. That's insane. Why wasn't this information made public? Because panic would have destroyed us faster than any alien invasion. Humanity in 2387 was not ready to fight a galactic war. Our technology was primitive, our military forces were small, and our industrial capacity could not match even a single hegemony species. We needed time to prepare, and that meant making the galaxy believe we were helpless. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. The colonies that have been destroyed. All those people who died fighting hopeless battles. You knew this would happen? Every single casualty was a volunteer, Kane said quietly. The Defense Force crews, the colonial militias, the planetary governors. They all knew they were buying time for the real war effort. Their sacrifice saved the human species, Doctor. Without their courage, none of what we accomplished would have been possible. Elena struggled to process what she was hearing. The greatest military disaster in human history had been deliberately planned from the beginning. Millions of brave souls had died not in hopeless last stands, but as part of an elaborate deception that stretched back decades. What did you find out there? She asked finally. We found the precursors. The single word sent chills down Elena's spine. The precursors were a legend, a myth whispered about in the deepest archives of xenoarchaeology. According to ancient records scattered across a dozen worlds, they had been the first species to achieve galactic civilization. They had ruled the galaxy millions of years ago before vanishing without explanation, leaving behind only ruins and mysteries. The precursors have been extinct for eons, Elena protested. Every xenoarchaeologist agrees on that. Not extinct, corrected Kane. Hidden. They retreated to the space between galaxies after the last Great War nearly destroyed all intelligent life. They've been watching, waiting for a species capable of inheriting their legacy. It turns out that humans have certain qualities that impress them greatly. Kane gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show something that took Elena's breath away. It was a space station of incredible size and complexity, built from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The structure was clearly artificial, but its design principles were unlike anything in human or hegemony technology. Welcome to Sanctuary Station, announced Kane. Our home for the last 20 years, and the birthplace of the new human fleet. The display zoomed in to show massive construction bays where ships were taking shape. But these were not the crude vessels that humanity had fielded against the hegemony. These ships were sleek predators of incredible size, armed with weapons that Elena could not even begin to understand. Energy patterns flowed along their hulls like living things, and the very space around them seemed to bend and twist in response to their presence. Precursor technology, breathed Elena. Enhanced and improved by human engineering, Kane confirmed. The precursors gave us the foundation, but we had to learn how to use it. 20 years of constant work by the best scientists and engineers that humanity could produce. We've built a fleet that can match anything the hegemony can field. Elena studied the ships on the display, trying to comprehend their implications. Each vessel was larger than a hegemony dreadnought, but they moved with a grace that seemed to defy physics. Weapon systems that looked like works of art were integrated seamlessly into hull designs that appeared almost organic in their flowing curves. How many ships do you have? She asked. Enough, Kane replied simply. But numbers are not our primary advantage. The hegemony relies on conventional weapons and defensive systems. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, energy shields, kinetic barriers. All of these technologies are based on principles that the precursors mastered and transcended millions of years ago. Our weapons operate according to different rules entirely. The display shifted again to show tactical projections of human ships engaging hegemony forces. Elena watched in amazement as the new human vessels seemed to phase in and out of reality, avoiding enemy fire by existing partially outside normal spacetime. Their weapons reach through dimensional barriers to strike targets from impossible angles, bypassing shields and armor as if they were not there. "This looks like magic," she said. "Advanced technology often appears magical to less developed civilizations," Kane agreed. "But it's all based on scientific principles." The precursors understood the fundamental structure of reality in ways that we are still learning. They could manipulate space, time, energy, and matter at the quantum level with the same ease that we manipulate simple machines. Elena tried to imagine the implications of such technology in human hands. "Why are you contacting me specifically?" "I'm a communications researcher, not a military commander." "Because you designed the quantum communication network that connects all human colonies," Kane explained. "We need you to send a very specific message to every surviving human settlement simultaneously. The survivors need to know that help is coming, but, more importantly, they need to coordinate their actions for the final phase of the plan." "What kind of coordination?" Kane's expression grew grimmer. "Every human civilian in the Orion arm needs to evacuate to predetermined shelter locations within the next 72 hours. What we're about to do will make the current war look like a minor skirmish. The hegemony has been fighting a defensive war without realizing it. Once we reveal our true capabilities, they will commit everything they have to destroying us. The collateral damage will be devastating." Elena felt a chill of fear. "Are you planning to destroy entire star systems?" "We're planning to save the galaxy," Kane replied. "But salvation often comes at a terrible price." "The hegemony is not just a military alliance, Doctor. It's a cancer that has been spreading through the galaxy for thousands of years. They destroy or enslave every species that shows potential for growth beyond their control. If we don't stop them here and now, they will eventually consume everything." The holographic display shifted to show a strategic map of the entire galaxy. Red zones marked hegemony territory, which covered nearly 80% of known space. The small blue area representing human space looked pathetically tiny by comparison. "The precursors fought this same war eons ago," Kane continued. "They won, but the cost was so high that they chose exile rather than rule over the ashes of galactic civilization. They'd been waiting for a species capable of fighting this war differently. Humanity was chosen not for our technology or our military prowess, but for our capacity to find solutions that others cannot see." Elena studied the galactic map, trying to understand the scope of what Kane was proposing. "You're talking about a war that could last for centuries and cost trillions of lives. Or we could end it in a matter of months with the right strategy," Kane countered. "The hegemony's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They depend entirely on their technological superiority to maintain control. Take away that advantage, and their entire power structure collapses." "How do you take away a technological advantage held by 7 of the most advanced species in the galaxy?" Kane smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "You give their enemies something better." The display changed to show shipping manifests and technical specifications that made Elena's head spin. Precursor technology was being packaged into devices that could be used by species with far less advanced scientific knowledge. Weapons that could destroy hegemony ships with a single shot. Defensive systems that could protect entire planets from orbital bombardment. Communication networks that operated faster than light without requiring massive infrastructure. "We're going to arm every oppressed species in the galaxy," Kane explained. "The hegemony has enemies on 10,000 worlds. Slave races that dream of freedom. Pliant species that resent their subordinate status. Independent civilizations that have been forced to submit to hegemony rule. Give them the tools to fight back, and the hegemony will face rebellions on every front simultaneously." Elena began to understand the true scope of the plan. It was not just a military campaign, but a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. "This will change everything." "That's the idea," agreed Kane. "The galaxy has been stagnant under hegemony rule for too long. It's time for a new age of exploration and growth. But first, we need to clear away the old order." The holographic display returned to show the fleet of human ships preparing for departure from Sanctuary Station. Thousands of vessels moved with perfect coordination, their crews trained to a level of efficiency that would have been impossible with conventional human technology. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering that combined human innovation with precursor knowledge. "When do you begin the offensive?" asked Elena. "We've already begun," Kane replied. "The first wave of ships departed Sanctuary 6 hours ago. They should arrive in the outer hegemony systems within the next 48 hours. By the time the hegemony leadership realizes what they're facing, it will be too late to mount an effective defense." Elena felt a mixture of excitement and terror as she contemplated the immediate future. The war that had seemed hopeless just hours ago was about to be transformed into something completely different. But the cost would be enormous, and there was no guarantee that humanity's secret weapons would be enough against the combined might of the galactic hegemony. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Kane's expression grew serious. "Send the evacuation orders to every human settlement in the Orion Arm. Make sure they understand that this is not a drill. Then, prepare to coordinate relief efforts for the aftermath. Win or lose, there are going to be a lot of refugees who need help." Elena nodded and began activating her communication arrays. The quantum transmitters that she had spent years developing would finally be put to their ultimate test. Every human colony, every research station, every military outpost would receive the same message simultaneously. But, as she worked, one question continued to trouble her. "Admiral, what if this plan fails? What if the hegemony proves too strong even for precursor technology?" Kane was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Then, humanity dies as a free species, and the galaxy remains in chains for another million years. But, Doctor, I've spent 20 years studying precursor records and fighting alongside their automated defense systems. I've learned things about the nature of consciousness and the evolution of intelligence that would revolutionize our understanding of existence itself." He paused, looking directly into Elena's eyes through the holographic link. "The precursors didn't choose humanity because we were the strongest or the smartest species in the galaxy. They chose us because we were the most adaptable. When faced with impossible odds, humans don't just fight harder. We changed the rules of the game entirely." The transmission began to fade as Elena completed her communication preparations. "Good luck, Admiral. The entire human species is counting on you. Not just humanity, Doctor. Every free-thinking being in the galaxy is counting on what happens in the next few days. The age of hegemony dominance is about to end. What replaces it will depend on choices that we make right here, right now." The holographic display vanished, leaving Elena alone with her equipment and the enormous responsibility that Kane had placed on her shoulders. In the next few hours, she would send messages that would trigger the largest military operation in galactic history. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and the fate of entire civilizations would be decided by weapons and strategies that most beings could not even imagine. Elena took a deep breath and began composing the evacuation orders. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, human ships were already moving toward their targets. The real war was about to begin, and the galactic hegemony had no idea what was coming for them. Admiral Zextar was still analyzing the tactical performance of human resistance fighters, trying to understand their unusual coordination and determination. He had no way of knowing that every battle he had fought was part of an elaborate deception, or that the humans he had defeated were heroes buying time for a counterstrike that would reshape the galaxy. The first phase of humanity's true war plan was already in motion. Phase 2 would begin when hegemony forces encountered weapons that operated according to principles beyond their understanding. Phase 3 would involve the liberation of oppressed species across the galaxy. But the final phase remained known only to Admiral Kane and the precursor artifacts that had chosen humanity as their inheritors. When the dust settled and the fighting ended, the galaxy would face a choice between stagnation and growth, between control and freedom. The humans were coming home, and they were bringing gifts that would change everything. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came from the Outer Rim territories. High Admiral Corthan stood before the holographic display in the Hegemony Supreme Command Center, watching red warning indicators spread across his tactical map like a plague. In the space of 6 hours, 17 hegemony garrison fleets had simply vanished without sending so much as a distress signal. No debris fields, no energy signatures, no evidence of battle. They were there one moment and gone the next. Status report from Sector 7, demanded Corthan, his scaled features twisted with growing concern. Communications Admiral Vexen manipulated the display with trembling claws. Unknown, sir. The 3rd Border Fleet was conducting routine patrols around the Zephyr colonies when they stopped responding to all communication attempts. Automated monitoring stations in that sector have also gone dark. Equipment failure? Negative. The pattern is too widespread and too coordinated. Something is systematically eliminating our outer defenses. Corthan studied the tactical display with the eye of a veteran who had commanded hegemony forces for over 50 years. The missing fleets were not clustered in any particular region, but spread across a broad front that encompassed nearly a quarter of hegemony space. Whatever was responsible for their disappearance was moving faster than any known transportation technology. What about sensor data from the affected areas? That's where it gets interesting, sir, replied Intelligence Commander Hexel. Long-range monitoring stations detected massive gravitational distortions in each system approximately 30 minutes before our fleets went missing. The distortions match no known natural phenomenon or technological signature in our databases. Show me. The display shifted to show sensor readings from the Vega system, one of the first areas to go dark. Energy patterns that made no sense swirled across the screen in colors that hurt to look at directly. Space itself seemed to be folding in on itself, creating impossible geometries that the computer could barely render. Whatever this is, it's operating according to physical principles that we don't understand, admitted Hexel. The energy requirements alone should be beyond the capabilities of any known species. Corthan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the command center. In 50 years of military service, he had never encountered anything that could eliminate entire fleets without leaving evidence. The hegemony had faced rebellions and invasions before, but always against enemies using recognizable technology and tactics. Sir, interrupted Communications Admiral Vexen, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Zextar's 3rd Assault Fleet. He reports encountering unprecedented resistance in the Orion arm. Put him through immediately. The holographic image of Admiral Zextar materialized above the command table, but his usual composure was clearly strained. Behind him, emergency lights flashed on the bridge of his flagship, and the sounds of damage control teams could be heard in the background. Hi Admiral, I must report that human resistance has undergone a dramatic change in both capability and tactics. We were engaged in a routine pacification operation against the colony world of New Carthage when we encountered ships unlike anything in our intelligence files. Explain. The vessels appear to be of human construction, but they utilize technology that defies conventional understanding. They phase in and out of normal spacetime, making targeting extremely difficult. Their weapons penetrate our shields as if they were not there, and their defensive capabilities seem to operate independently of known energy requirements. Corthan studied his subordinate's face, looking for signs of panic or confusion. Admiral Zextar was one of his most reliable commanders, not given to exaggeration or wild theories. If he reported impossible technology, there was probably something to it. Casualties? Severe, sir. We've lost 37 ships in the last 4 hours, including 2 heavy dreadnoughts. The enemy fleet consists of only 12 vessels, but they fight with coordination that suggests a level of tactical integration beyond our current capabilities. Corthan felt his confidence beginning to crack. Losing 37 ships to a force 1/3 that size was not just embarrassing, it was strategically disastrous. The 3rd Assault Fleet was one of the most powerful formations in the Hegemony Navy. Recommendations? I am requesting immediate reinforcement by the 1st and 2nd battle groups. Whatever the humans have developed, it represents a threat to hegemony naval superiority that must be addressed with overwhelming force. Denied, said Corthan immediately. Those units are needed to investigate the missing fleets in the outer sectors. Disengage from the enemy and fall back to Rally Point Omega. We need time to analyze this new threat before committing additional resources. Zextar's expression showed his disagreement with the order, but he nodded reluctantly. Understood, sir. However, I must note that the human ships are not pursuing my withdrawal. They appear to be content with defending their current position. Interesting. Maintain long-range observation and report any changes in enemy behavior. The transmission ended, leaving Corthan alone with his growing fears. Two separate phenomena were threatening hegemony dominance simultaneously. Missing fleets in the outer sectors and impossible human technology in the Orion arm. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Hexel, I want a complete review of all intelligence regarding human technological capabilities. Start with their exploration programs from 20 years ago and work forward. Look for any indication that they possess advanced technology beyond what we've observed in combat. As his staff carried out these orders, Corthan studied the galactic map with new eyes. For the first time in his career, he began to consider the possibility that the hegemony had seriously underestimated a potential enemy. The humans had appeared to be a primitive species with limited military capabilities, but appearances could be deceiving. 3 hours later, Intelligence Commander Hexel returned with a report that sent cold fear through Corthan's veins. Sir, we've discovered significant gaps in our intelligence regarding human space exploration. 20 years ago, the Earth government launched something called the Void Jump Experiment, involving their most advanced ships and their best crews. Official records indicate that the expedition was destroyed during testing of experimental faster-than-light drives. You doubt the official records? Our intelligence operatives on Earth reported inconsistencies at the time. The ships that allegedly exploded were observed departing Earth space, but no debris was ever recovered. More importantly, several of Earth's most advanced scientists and engineers vanished around the same time, officially listed as casualties of the expedition. Corthan studied the intelligence summary with growing alarm. How many ships? According to our files, approximately 300 vessels of various classes departed Earth space as part of the Void Jump Experiment. If even half of them survived, that would represent a significant hidden military force. 300 ships could not eliminate 17 garrison fleets. No sir, but 300 ships with 20 years to develop advanced technology might be capable of extraordinary things. Especially if they had access to knowledge sources unavailable to known galactic civilization. The implications hit Corthan like a physical blow. The humans had not been caught unprepared by the hegemony invasion. They had been expecting it for decades, using that time to develop countermeasures that the hegemony could not anticipate or defend against. The easy victories in the Orion arm had been a deception designed to lure hegemony forces into vulnerable positions. Status of our remaining border fleets? 23 garrison groups are maintaining communications and report normal operating parameters. However, 8 more fleets have encountered gravitational anomalies similar to those that preceded the disappearances. Corthan realized that he was facing a strategic disaster of unprecedented proportions. The hegemony military doctrine was based on the assumption of technological superiority over all potential enemies. But, if humans possessed weapons and defensive systems beyond hegemony understanding, then decades of strategic planning would prove useless. Alert the Council of Species immediately. We need an emergency session to address this threat. Sir, should we recall our forces from the Orion arm offensive? Corthan considered the question carefully. Retreating would provide strategic flexibility, but it would also signal weakness to the galaxy's countless oppressed species. The hegemony maintained control through the perception of invincible strength. Any sign of uncertainty could trigger rebellions across 1,000 worlds. Negative. We maintain current offensive operations while reinforcing our border defenses. But, I want all available intelligence assets focused on determining the true extent of human capabilities. As his staff rushed to carry out these orders, Corthan found himself facing the most difficult decision of his career. The hegemony had built its power through careful aggression, always choosing battles that could be won with acceptable losses. But, this situation offered no clear path to victory. The communication array activated again, bringing urgent reports from across hegemony space. Slave species on dozens of worlds were reporting unusual activity in orbit around their planets. Unidentified ships were appearing without warning, deploying unknown devices, and then vanishing before planetary defenses could respond. "Sir," announced Communications Admiral Vexen, "we're receiving reports of civil unrest on 17 hegemony client worlds. The Kratari labor colonies are reporting that their human slave populations have somehow acquired advanced weapons and are leading uprising against their overseers." Corthan stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The pattern was becoming clear. Humans had not just developed advanced military technology in secret. They had been preparing for a coordinated campaign to destabilize the entire hegemony power structure. What kind of weapons are the slaves using? Unknown technology that appears to disintegrate hegemony battle armor on contact. Personal defensive shields are useless against whatever energy beam these devices produce. Kratari security forces are requesting immediate military support. The same technology that Admiral Zexstar reported encountering in naval combat? Similar energy signatures, yes sir. Corthan felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a crushing burden. The humans were not just fighting a defensive war in the Orion arm. They were conducting simultaneous operations across the entire galaxy, arming rebellions and supporting insurrections with technology that made hegemony forces obsolete. How many worlds are affected by the uprising? Current count is 47 and rising rapidly. The rebellions appear to be coordinated through some kind of faster-than-light communication system that we cannot detect or intercept. The scale of the human operation was staggering. Coordinating military actions across dozens of star systems required logistics capabilities that should have been far beyond any single species. But the evidence was undeniable. Humans had been planning this campaign for years, possibly decades. "Sir," announced Intelligence Commander Hexel, "long-range sensors have detected massive fleet movements in the space between galaxies. Energy signatures are consistent with the gravitational anomalies that preceded the border fleet disappearances." "How massive?" "Conservative estimates suggest several thousand vessels of unknown configuration approaching our outer territories. They will reach our border systems in approximately 18 hours. Corthan realized that the hegemony was facing an existential threat unlike anything in their history. Not just a military defeat, but the complete collapse of their galactic order. The humans had somehow acquired technology that rendered hegemony forces obsolete, and they were using it to support liberation movements across the galaxy. "Emergency protocols are now in effect," he announced to his staff. "All hegemony fleets are to assume maximum alert status. Industrial worlds are to begin immediate conversion to military production. Client species are to provide all available military resources for homeland defense." As his commands went out across the galactic communication network, Corthan studied the tactical display one final time. The red zones marking human activity were spreading across the map like wildfire, connecting with rebellion sites and resistance movements that the hegemony had suppressed for centuries. The humans were not just fighting for their own freedom. They were fighting to liberate the entire galaxy from hegemony dominance. And they appeared to have the technological capability to succeed. For the first time in his career, High Admiral Corthan was forced to consider the possibility that the galactic hegemony might lose a war. Not just suffer casualties or strategic setbacks, but face complete military defeat and the collapse of their civilization. The humans were coming, and they were bringing revolution with them. Admiral Marcus Kane stood on the bridge of the UEN battleship Prometheus, watching as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of hegemony territory. Around him, thousands of ships materialized from the space between dimensions, their hulls gleaming with energy patterns that spoke of technology beyond conventional understanding. "Admiral," reported Captain Sarah Reyes, "all ships report ready for combat operations. Precursor weapon systems are online and functioning within optimal parameters." Kane nodded, studying the tactical display that showed hegemony positions throughout the local sector. After 20 years of preparation and planning, the moment of truth had finally arrived. Humanity's secret fleet was about to face the combined might of galactic civilization's greatest military alliance. "Signal to all ships," he ordered. "Operation Prometheus is now active. Primary objectives are the liberation of oppressed species and the elimination of hegemony military capabilities. Rules of engagement are defensive action only against civilian populations. Understood, sir. Shall we engage the nearest hegemony garrison? Kane smiled grimly as he contemplated the irony of the situation. The hegemony had spent 3 years systematically destroying human colonies, believing they were crushing a primitive species. Now they would learn that those colonies had been defended by volunteers who knowingly sacrificed their lives to maintain humanity's deception. Negative. We begin with the liberation camps on Vorthan Prime. It's time to show the galaxy what humans really fight for. The human fleet moved forward with purpose and determination that would have terrified the hegemony commanders if they had understood what they were facing. But understanding would come soon enough, along with the realization that their galaxy would never be the same again. The liberation of Vorthan Prime took exactly 17 minutes. Admiral Kane watched from the bridge of the Prometheus as his fleet materialized around the heavily fortified world that served as the hegemony's primary slave processing center. Orbital defense platforms that could have destroyed conventional fleets opened fire immediately, launching waves of antimatter torpedoes and plasma beams that should have overwhelmed any attacking force. Instead, the human ships seemed to absorb the incoming fire like sponges soaking up water. Precursor defensive technology operated on principles that transcended simple energy deflection. Rather than blocking or deflecting enemy weapons, the human vessels existed partially outside normal spacetime, allowing hostile energy to pass through dimensions where it could cause no damage. All defense platforms neutralized, reported Tactical Officer Commander Chen. Deploying liberation teams to the surface. Kane studied the tactical display as hundreds of small craft detached from the main fleet and descended toward Vorthan Prime. Each transport carried a team of human volunteers equipped with precursor technology that would allow them to free slaves who had been imprisoned for generations. Admiral, announced Communications Officer Lieutenant Torres, were receiving transmissions from the slave compounds. Word is spreading that the liberators have arrived. The prisoners are organizing resistance movements to assist our operations. It was exactly what Kane had hoped to hear. The human fleet carried more than advanced weapons and defensive systems. They brought hope to billions of beings who had lived their entire lives in chains, never daring to believe that freedom was possible. Status of the hegemony garrison? The orbital fleet is attempting to withdraw to the outer system, reported Commander Chen. Shall we pursue? Negative. Our mission is liberation, not conquest. Allow them to retreat and spread word of what they've witnessed. The hegemony leadership needs to understand that their old tactics will not work against us. On the surface of Vorthan Prime, human liberation teams were discovering the true horror of hegemony civilization. Massive industrial complexes where slave workers toiled in conditions that would have killed most species within weeks. Breeding facilities where prisoners were treated like livestock, forced to produce children who would never know freedom. Research laboratories where captured beings were subjected to experiments that violated every principle of civilized behavior. Admiral, said Dr. Sarah Martinez over the communication link from the planet's surface, we've found evidence that the hegemony has been using slave labor for biological weapons research. They've been trying to develop pathogens specifically designed to target non-hegemony species. Kane felt cold anger wash through him as he considered the implications. The hegemony was not content with military conquest. They were actively working to commit genocide against every species that refused to submit to their rule. Document everything, Doctor. The galaxy needs to see what the hegemony really represents. As the liberation operations continued on Vorthan Prime, reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Other human fleets were conducting similar operations on dozens of worlds simultaneously, freeing slaves and documenting hegemony atrocities that had been hidden for centuries. But the hegemony was not passive in the face of this assault. Their response came in the form of the largest military fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Admiral, announced Lieutenant Torres, long-range sensors are detecting massive hegemony fleet movements toward our position. Estimated strength is over 1,500 capital ships supported by thousands of smaller vessels. Kane studied the sensor data with professional interest. The hegemony was committing almost their entire naval force to a single engagement, clearly hoping to overwhelm the human fleet through sheer numbers. It was exactly the response he had anticipated. Signal all ships to prepare for major fleet engagement. Precursor weapon systems are to remain on defensive protocols until I give specific authorization for offensive action. Sir, questioned Commander Chen, defensive protocols against 1,500 capital ships? Shouldn't we consider a tactical withdrawal? Kane smiled grimly as he contemplated the battle that was about to begin. The hegemony fleet represented the accumulated military might of 7 major species, refined through centuries of conquest and domination. Any conventional force would be swept away like leaves before a hurricane. But the human ships carried weapons that operated according to principles that the hegemony could not understand or counter. Commander, the precursors fought wars that span entire galaxies. They faced enemies that could crack planets with their thoughts and bend spacetime to their will. The technology they've given us was designed to handle threats that make the hegemony look like children playing with toys. The massive hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their ships arranged in the classic battle configuration that had brought victory to countless engagements. Massive dreadnoughts took position in the center, supported by cruiser squadrons and screens of smaller vessels. Behind them, carrier groups launched clouds of automated fighters and heavy bombers. It was an intimidating display of military power that had broken the will of entire species. But it would not be enough. Incoming transmission from the hegemony flagship, announced Lieutenant Torres. High Admiral Corthan wishes to discuss terms. Put him through. The holographic image of the hegemony Supreme Commander appeared above the bridge command table. High Admiral Corthan looked older than his intelligence files suggested, with stress lines around his eyes that spoke of the pressure he had been under since the human offensive began. Admiral Kane, I am authorized to offer terms for the immediate cessation of hostilities. The Hegemony Council is prepared to discuss territorial concessions and reparations for damages incurred during the Orion arm campaign. Kane studied his opponent with interest. High Admiral Corthan was a skilled military leader who had spent decades building the hegemony into the galaxy's dominant power. The fact that he was offering negotiations rather than demanding surrender suggested that he understood the true scope of the threat he faced. High Admiral, I appreciate your desire to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But the time for negotiations passed when your forces began systematically exterminating human colonies. We are not here to discuss territorial boundaries or financial compensation. Then, what do you want? The complete dissolution of the galactic hegemony and the liberation of every oppressed species under your control. Corthan's expression showed his shock at the scope of Kane's demands. You're talking about the destruction of galactic civilization itself. Without the hegemony to maintain order, the galaxy will collapse into chaos and warfare that will last for millennia. The hegemony has maintained order through slavery and genocide, Kane replied coldly. That is not civilization, High Admiral. That is organized barbarism on a galactic scale. The chaos you fear cannot possibly be worse than the systematic oppression you've created. You have perhaps 200 ships, Corthan pointed out. I have 1,500 capital ships and supporting forces. Whatever technology you possess, it cannot overcome those odds. Kane activated a control on his command chair, and the holographic display shifted to show technical specifications that made Corthan's eyes widen in shock. Energy output ratings that exceeded the total power generation of most star systems. Weapon ranges measured in light years rather than light minutes. Defensive capabilities that operated outside the normal laws of physics. High Admiral, human ships carry technology that your scientists would consider impossible. We could destroy your entire fleet without suffering a single casualty. But that is not our preferred outcome. I'm offering you one chance to order your forces to stand down and begin peaceful transition to a free galactic community. Corthan studied the technical data for several seconds before responding. Even if your specifications are accurate, you cannot be everywhere at once. The hegemony controls thousands of worlds across the galaxy. You would need decades to liberate them all. High Admiral, please activate your long-range communication systems and contact your garrison commanders in the Outer Rim territories. Corthan looked puzzled but followed Kane's suggestion. Within moments, his expression changed from confidence to horror as reports flooded in from across hegemony space. Garrison fleets were under attack by human forces that appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Slave worlds were being liberated faster than military commanders could respond. Industrial centers that had operated for centuries using forced labor were shutting down as their workers gained access to weapons that made hegemony forces obsolete. Impossible, breathed Corthan. You would need thousands of ships to coordinate operations on this scale. We have thousands of ships, Kane confirmed. The liberation of Vorthan Prime was just one operation among hundreds occurring simultaneously across the galaxy. While your military forces concentrate here to fight us, the foundation of your civilization is crumbling everywhere else. The tactical display updated to show the true scope of human operations. Red indicators marked hegemony worlds under attack or already liberated, while blue zones showed the spread of rebellion movements supported by human technology. Nearly half the galaxy was already in chaos as oppressed species rose against their overlords. This is not just a military campaign, Kane continued. It's a revolution that will transform galactic civilization. The age of empire and slavery is ending, High Admiral. What replaces it depends on choices that you make right here, right now. Corthan studied the display in silence for several minutes, clearly struggling with the implications of what he was seeing. Finally, he looked directly at Kane through the holographic link. What guarantees can you offer that this revolution will not simply replace hegemony tyranny with human dominance? None whatsoever, Kane replied honestly. Humanity could certainly choose to become a galactic empire using the technology we've acquired. But that is not what we want, and it's not what the precursors intended when they chose us as their inheritors. Kane activated another control, and the display shifted to show plans for post-war galactic organization. Independent species councils with equal representation. Trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Scientific cooperation that would advance all civilizations rather than concentrating knowledge among elite groups. The precursors learned that galactic empires are inherently unstable, Kane explained. They tried to rule through force and nearly destroyed all intelligent life in the process. That's why they chose exile rather than reconstruction. They've been waiting for a species capable of learning from their mistakes. And you believe humans are that species? I believe that every species has the potential for growth and improvement, Kane answered. Humans are not inherently superior to any other race. But we have demonstrated certain qualities that the precursors found encouraging. Adaptability in the face of impossible odds. Willingness to sacrifice for principles rather than personal gain. Most importantly, the capacity to change our fundamental assumptions about how civilization should work. Corthan considered these words carefully before responding. What you're proposing would mean the end of everything that the hegemony has built over thousands of years. Yes, Kane agreed. But it would also mean the beginning of something better. The hegemony has created a galaxy where most beings live in fear and servitude while a few species enjoy absolute power. That is not sustainable in the long term, and it's not worthy of the incredible potential that exists within galactic civilization. The communication was interrupted as alarms began sounding on the bridge of Corthan's flagship. Emergency signals flooded in from across the hegemony fleet as human ships began materializing throughout their formation. But these were not the same vessels that Corthan had been negotiating with. These ships were larger, more complex, their hulls flowing with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved through the hegemony formation like ghosts, ignoring weapons fire and defensive barriers as if they were not there. Admiral, announced Commander Chen, precursor command ships are taking position around the hegemony fleet. Admiral Kane, they're requesting permission to demonstrate advanced capabilities. Kane realized that the moment of truth had arrived. The precursors themselves were intervening in the battle, using their most advanced technology to show the galaxy what was possible when intelligence transcended the limitations of conventional physics. Permission granted. But, remember, our goal is demonstration, not destruction. What happened next would be remembered as the moment when galactic civilization changed forever. The precursor command ships activated weapons that existed partially outside normal spacetime, reaching across dimensional barriers to strike hegemony vessels from angles that should not have been possible. But, instead of destroying the enemy fleet, the weapons did something far more impressive. Every single hegemony ship found itself completely paralyzed, their weapon systems deactivated and their engines shut down by forces that operated beyond their understanding. 1,500 capital ships, the pride of galactic military technology, rendered as helpless as children's toys by beings who had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself. "High Admiral," said Kane softly, "this is what the future looks like. Technology that transcends violence because it transcends the limitations that make violence necessary. Your ships are not destroyed. Your crews are not harmed. But, your capacity to enforce oppression through military force has been permanently removed." Corthan stared at his tactical displays in shock as he realized that every ship under his command was completely helpless. No weapon could fire, no engine could engage, no shield could activate. They were alive and unharmed, but utterly powerless to resist whatever Kane chose to do next. "What now?" asked Corthan quietly. "Now we begin the real work," Kane replied. "Building a galaxy where conflicts are resolved through cooperation rather than conquest. Where every species has the opportunity to reach its full potential. Where the incredible diversity of galactic life becomes a source of strength rather than a justification for oppression." The largest military engagement in galactic history was over without a single shot being fired in anger. But the real challenge was just beginning. 1 year after the Battle of Vorthan Prime, Admiral Marcus Kane stood before the first galactic assembly in the history of the galaxy. Representatives from over 3,000 species filled the massive chamber that had been constructed in the space where the Hegemony Supreme Command Center once stood. Beings of every conceivable form sat together in sections organized not by species dominance, but by geographic regions and shared interests. Former slave races spoke as equals with their previous overlords. Ancient civilizations that had hidden in isolation for millennia emerged to share their knowledge with eager students. "The transformation has exceeded our most optimistic projections," reported Dr. Elena Vasquez as she updated the assembly on reconstruction progress. Former hegemony industrial worlds have successfully converted to voluntary labor systems with productivity increases averaging 40%. Educational programs have been established on over 1,200 worlds where populations were previously denied access to advanced knowledge. Kane listened to the reports with satisfaction tempered by realistic understanding of the challenges that remained. Dismantling a galactic empire was far easier than building a sustainable alternative. The past year had seen remarkable progress, but also conflicts and problems that would require generations to fully resolve. "The medical assistance programs have been particularly successful," continued Dr. Vasquez. "Precursor healing technology has been adapted for use by dozens of different species, eliminating diseases that have plagued galactic civilization for thousands of years. Life expectancy has increased by an average of 30% across all participating worlds." Former High Admiral Corthan, now serving as a regional security coordinator, stood to address the assembly. The transition had been difficult for many hegemony leaders, but Corthan had proven surprisingly adaptable to the new galactic order. "I must report that criminal organizations are attempting to exploit the transition period," he announced. "Several groups of former hegemony military officers have stolen obsolete warships and are conducting piracy operations against merchant vessels. However, human security forces have been effective at tracking and neutralizing these threats." Kane nodded acknowledgement of the report. They had anticipated that some individuals would attempt to profit from the chaos of transition. The solution was not to reimpose authoritarian control, but to demonstrate that criminal behavior would not be tolerated in the new galactic community. "Admiral Kane," announced Assembly Speaker Veltar, a former slave who now represented the Outer Rim territories, "there are questions regarding the long-term role of human forces in galactic security. Many species are concerned about the concentration of advanced military technology under human control." It was a question that Kane had been expecting for months. The human fleet remained the most powerful military force in the galaxy by several orders of magnitude. While humans had consistently acted as liberators rather than conquerors, it was natural for other species to worry about the potential for future dominance. Kane activated the holographic display at his speaking position, showing technical specifications that brought gasps of amazement from across the assembly chamber. Distinguished representatives, I am pleased to announce that the technology transfer program has reached its final phase. Precursor defensive systems and non-lethal security technology are now available to all member species of the Galactic Assembly. Every world will have access to planetary shields that can stop any conceivable military attack, and security forces that can maintain order without causing permanent harm to lawbreakers. The implications of this announcement rippled through the chamber like waves through water. Species that had lived in fear of military conquest for their entire recorded history were being offered protection that made invasion impossible. Former enemies could cooperate without worrying about betrayal because neither side would have the ability to harm the other. The weapons technology will remain under human oversight for the immediate future, Kane continued. But, this is a temporary measure designed to prevent accidental conflicts during the transition period. As galactic civilization stabilizes and matures, advanced offensive capabilities will be transferred to the assembly as a whole. Representative Zexen of the former Crystalline Collective stood to ask a question that many beings were undoubtedly thinking. Admiral Kane, what prevents humans from simply using their technological advantage to dominate the galaxy as the hegemony did? Kane had spent considerable time preparing for this question because it struck at the heart of concerns about human intentions. The answer required understanding principles that transcended simple military or political considerations. Representative Zexen, the precursors chose humans not because we were perfect, but because we had demonstrated certain qualities that they believed were essential for galactic leadership. Specifically, the ability to recognize when power should be shared rather than hoarded. Kane activated another section of the holographic display, showing historical records of human behavior during the liberation campaigns. Time after time, human forces had chosen to withdraw from conquered territories rather than establish permanent occupation. Resources had been freely shared with former enemies. Knowledge had been transferred without restrictions or requirements for submission. The precursors learned through bitter experience that any species capable of achieving galactic dominance will eventually face the choice between continued expansion and long-term survival, Kane explained. The hegemony chose expansion and nearly destroyed all intelligent life in the galaxy. Humans have chosen a different path. But, what guarantees exist that humans will continue to make such choices? Pressed Representative Zexen. Kane smiled as he prepared to reveal the final element of the human plan for galactic reconstruction. Because the choice will not remain ours alone to make. The holographic display shifted to show the most closely guarded secret of the human fleet. Deep within the hulls of every human ship, precursor technology had been quietly analyzing and recording the decision-making patterns of human commanders. Every choice, every moral judgment, every moment of temptation to abuse power had been carefully documented and studied. The precursors have been observing human behavior throughout this entire conflict, Kane announced. They wanted to determine whether our species could be trusted with the ultimate responsibility of galactic stewardship. Based on their analysis, they have made a decision that will fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization. Kane paused to let the tension build before revealing information that would reshape every being's understanding of their place in the universe. The precursors are returning. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation as beings tried to process the implications of this revelation. Species that were barely legends would soon walk among them again, bringing knowledge and wisdom accumulated over millions of years of existence. Not as rulers, Kane clarified once order was restored. As teachers and guides for species that have proven themselves capable of growth beyond their current limitations. Humanity was tested first because we were perceived as having the greatest potential for both creation and destruction. But every species in this chamber will have the opportunity to earn precursor guidance and advanced technology. Representative Hexel of the former Machine Consciousness asked the obvious follow-up question. What must we do to earn such guidance? Demonstrate that your species can place the welfare of galactic civilization above your own immediate interests, Kane replied. The precursors are not interested in creating another empire or hierarchy. They want to nurture a community of equals, each contributing their unique strengths to the advancement of all. Kane activated the final section of his presentation, showing plans for projects that would span centuries and involve the cooperation of hundreds of species. Exploration missions to other galaxies where new civilizations might be encountered. Scientific research that could unlock the deepest secrets of existence itself. Cultural exchanges that would create art and music beyond anything previously imagined. The war is over, Kane announced. But the real adventure is just beginning. Humanity fought to free the galaxy from oppression, but we cannot build the future alone. That will require the combined efforts of every species represented in this chamber. As the assembly session concluded and representatives began discussing the incredible possibilities that Kane had outlined, former Admiral Zextar approached the human commander with a question that had been troubling him since the liberation began. Admiral Kane, there is something I must know. During the war, I encountered human resistance fighters who displayed remarkable courage and coordination. They knew they were going to die, yet they fought with determination that impressed even veteran hegemony officers. How do you explain such behavior? Kane considered the question carefully before answering. Admiral Zextar, those fighters were volunteers who understood that their sacrifice was necessary to maintain our deception. They knew that their deaths would buy time for the hidden fleets to prepare for liberation operations. But, more importantly, they believed in the principles we were fighting for. Principles worth dying for? Admiral, human history is full of individuals who chose death rather than compromise their deepest beliefs. Freedom, justice, the protection of innocent beings, the right of all species to determine their own destiny. These are not just abstract concepts to us. They are values that define what it means to be truly alive. Zextar nodded slowly as he began to understand the fundamental difference between human motivations and those of most galactic species. The hegemony fought to maintain control and accumulate power. Humans fought for ideals that transcended personal survival. Exactly. And that is why the precursors chose to trust us with their technology. Not because we were the strongest or the smartest species, but because we understood that true strength comes from serving something greater than yourself. As the former enemy spoke, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy detailing the progress of reconstruction efforts. Former slave worlds were establishing educational systems and democratic governments. Ancient civilizations were sharing knowledge that advanced understanding of science and philosophy. Trade networks were developing based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. But, perhaps most importantly, young beings from dozens of different species were working together on projects that their ancestors would never have imagined. Human engineers collaborated with crystalline collective architects to design cities that could house multiple species in harmony. Former machine consciousness analysts worked with aquatic federation biologists to develop environmental restoration programs for damaged worlds. The galaxy was learning that diversity was not a source of conflict, but a wellspring of creativity and innovation that could solve problems no single species could handle alone. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached Kane as he prepared to return to the Human Fleet Command Center. Admiral, the precursors have requested a meeting to discuss the next phase of development programs. They want to begin selecting candidates from other species for advanced training. Kane felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he contemplated the future that was taking shape. The war had been won not through superior firepower, but through the demonstration that cooperation was more powerful than domination. The galaxy would never again be threatened by empire builders who sought to impose their will through violence. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow, he decided. And, Elena? Make sure representatives from at least 20 different species are included. The precursors need to see that galactic civilization is ready for the next stage of development. As Kane returned to his ship, he passed through corridors where humans worked alongside beings whose ancestors had been enemies just 1 year before. Former hegemony officers served as advisors for security programs. Scientists from species that had never spoken to each other collaborated on research projects. Children from dozens of worlds attended schools where they learned about the incredible diversity of life throughout the galaxy. The transformation was not complete, and might never be complete in any absolute sense. But it was real and growing stronger every day. The galaxy had learned that freedom was not something that could be given or taken away by others. It was something that each being had to claim for themselves and defend through their daily choices. Humanity had returned to the Orion Arm not as conquerors, but as catalysts for a revolution that would continue long after the last human ship had been forgotten. The greatest victory was not the defeat of the hegemony, but the demonstration that galactic civilization could transcend the cycles of oppression and rebellion that had limited its potential for millions of years. The stars themselves seemed brighter as Admiral Kane contemplated a future where every species would have the opportunity to reach heights of achievement that had once seemed impossible. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And, in the space between galaxies, the precursors watched with satisfaction as their chosen successors proved worthy of the trust that had been placed in them. The galaxy was finally ready to join the community of mature civilizations that spanned the universe, contributing its unique perspective to the eternal quest for knowledge and understanding. The Orion Arm had burned in galactic war, but from those ashes had risen something far greater than what had been destroyed. Humanity had kept its promise to return, bringing not vengeance, but hope for a future that belonged to all beings who chose to embrace it. The real adventure was just beginning.